Who will be the number 3 receiver for the Dallas Cowboys during the 2024 season? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions, including how does the consensus board line up with the Cowboys' needs? Which player could be the odd man out on defense now that Mike Zimmer is the defensive coordinator? But Landon, we're going to start with a really good question about the Cowboys wide receiver group going into the year. This one is from at D_Major18. He wants to know if Michael Gallup gets designated as a post-June 1 cut, which we think is very likely, who will be the number 3 receiver for the Cowboys? And is there a chance they bring back Cedric Wilson? He also wanted to know that.
I don't know if there's a chance that they bring back Cedric Wilson. I mean, it may just be that he has kind of priced himself out for what you're looking for, that kind of free agent wide receiver 3, but maybe not. Maybe you could.
I mean, he's also like 29 or 30 at this.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? Is that he's kind of getting a little long in the tooth. And the other thing, the kind of bigger part of the problem there is that, I mean, this draft class is just filthy with wide receivers. Like it's just, it's crazy how deep this class is. And, the free agent class, I mean, really, we're going to get into a point soon. I mean, it's already to this point, right? Where there's going to be so many rosterable wide receivers in the league that I wonder, like, if we don't start to see sort of a real buyer's market start to develop here very, very soon, right?
Well, and the reason we haven't had that happen, though, yet is because the last couple draft classes have really lacked, like, the mid-range receivers. And if you look at the wide receiver depth chart across the NFL this year, like, there was a lot of teams that were just lacking receiver talent. I think this receiver class is going to change something. I think you could get like 20 guys from this class make an NFL roster and contribute in year one.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, you take away the top, 6 or 7 wide receivers, and this whole class could be the entirety of the middle class of wide receiver in the NFL. It's that deep, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think that you're going to have to kind of start out with the idea that Tolbert will be your kind of going into the offseason wide receiver 3, but looking to upgrade, right? Like, I mean, at the very least, looking to add more talent to the room. I do think that if you wanted to kind of talk yourself into cobbling together a wide receiver 3 role with Tolbert, in combination with some of the other folks you have, kind of a little bit further down the roster. I mean, we obviously saw a lot of kind of situational packages for certain guys kind of getting rotated in. But I think if you're really looking to kind of bring somebody in, like as a wide receiver 3 option or someone to push Tolbert, your best bet is probably in the draft. I think you could go out and sign a guy in free agency if you wanted. But I think that's probably more of a swing for the fences guy, right? Like I just don't know that I don't know that it's going to be worth it to go get whatever it's cost to get a middle class wide receiver as your wide receiver 3.
No, you shouldn't pay that guy anyways. Like, you really shouldn't make a habit of paying a wide receiver 3 anything more than on a rookie deal or just slightly above vet minimum. I think that's where teams get in trouble.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that especially when you talk about what we just talked about, where you're probably going to get similar talent from the draft at a fraction of the price, right? And obviously usually a lot younger than than obviously anyone that you're
Well,
going to be getting in the free agent market. So,
and I just want to make a point. Like Cedric Wilson is the exact reason why you don't do that. Like look at what Miami did with Cedric Wilson. They paid Cedric Wilson a bunch of money to be their third receiver. And for the last 2 years, they've been trying to trade him to anybody that would take him, and nobody wanted him. Now he did have some nice moments, but you can't justify paying that guy $7, $8, $9 million a year if they're only going to be on the field a handful of snaps, and they're only going to get 50 targets a season.
yeah, and those are nice guys to have, but not nice guys to pay.
Correct. Yes.
And
That's
I think,
very good point. Yes.
I think that and the way that you get them, have them without paying them is to draft them. So,
Yes.
it's about, and look, this is I'm going to bring up the name Jalen Brooks here, right? Because Jalen Brooks is Cedric Wilson, a couple of years. So you see a guy that came in as a 6th or 7th round pick last season, was able to earn some spots, was valuable in all the kind of ancillary aspects of wide receiver, much like Cedric Wilson was early in his career. And you hope a guy like that can develop into your wide receiver 4, or the kind of guy behind the wide receiver 3. So you can, like I said, there is a way that you do this where you cobble together a role between Brooks, Turpin, and Tolbert, right? But I do think that there's just so much talent in this draft class that taking a wide receiver at in the 4th round, 3rd round, or something like that, depending on what you're looking at. I think you could plug in a guy that could help you potentially right away. Maybe not be the full-time wide receiver 3, but depending on how well you hit, maybe the full-time wide receiver, right? Depending on the kind of role that you're looking to have, maybe he's the full-time wide receiver 3. So generally speaking, I think drafting a guy is probably your best bet to get the wide receiver 3, or relying on what you've got and hoping that Tolbert kind of takes the next step. Free agency doesn't make a lot of sense for kind of going to get this sort of level of wide receiver.
I think the most realistic option is that it's just Jalen Tolbert as your clear-cut wide receiver 3, and he plays like 85% of the wide receiver 3 snaps. Not 85% of the
85% of the whole snaps. I got you.
Yeah, right. I think there's also an outside chance that if Jalen Tolbert can continue to develop like we saw this year, because he was clearly better, maybe he's your wide receiver 2, and Brandon Cooks, as he ages a little bit, slides more into that wide receiver 3 role. And that way you can kind of limit the number of touches that he gets on his body. Like, I think ideally in a perfect world, that's what happens for the Cowboys, and they feel great about their wide receiver core. I also would say, Landon, there is an outside chance, and I'm putting this at like a 5 to 10% chance, that maybe you have a CeeDee Lamb situation here where you have a guy ranked as a top 10 player on the board. They fall down to you at pick 24, and you just take him, and that's your number 2 receiver. Because we should mention Brandon Cooks, this is the last year of his deal. Jalen Tolbert has 2 years remaining on his deal, and then there's basically nothing else behind him. I don't see that happening, because that would mean a lot of teams would be passing on that player. That's just a lot harder to believe than when CeeDee fell to 17. I think you're right, though. I think like day 2 is this perfect spot to grab a receiver. And I'm just going to name you some of the guys that are being projected in that range.
Okay.
These are all guys on the consensus board right now from the media that aren't projected to be first-round picks. They have that ADP outside of the top 32. Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin, A.D. Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, Roman Wilson, Tez Walker, Malachi Corley, Xavier Worthy, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Legette, Brendan Rice. That is, how many guys did I just name? There's 17 guys.
7 or 8.
Yeah.
I mean, that just shows you like, and all those guys are extremely different, right? And like, the Cowboys are in a spot, right, where this really could work out for them, right? Like, let's say, I'm just going to throw this out to make Marcus mouth water a little bit. Let's say you go and draft a Malachi Corley, right?
Oh my gosh.
And here's the thing about that thing like that, right? You already have your set of wide receivers that are your kind of, normal route runners. You have a complement of receivers that you can go out and run your offense. You don't need another third wide receiver. But if you went out and got a guy like Malachi Corley, you could slow roll him into the offense, right? Because you don't need to rely on him. He's a guy that, a lot of teams probably would pass on, because not as developed as a route runner, not as developed at getting open down the field, or more of a lots of Cordell Patterson, lots of Deebo Samuel coming out, kind of comparisons. This is a guy that you want to get the ball into his hands and then have him run through secondaries.
Mm-hmm.
So normally teams would be a little bit hesitant about taking him at a certain point because, hey, how quickly can I get him into the offense? Is it going to only be screens and slants early on? How am I going to work this guy in? I've got needs in my passing attack that I'm looking to fill as a wide receiver. The Cowboys don't necessarily need that. The Cowboys, this is cherry on top situation for the Cowboys receiving core. So that's why I really like this, is because the Cowboys are, at a spot where they easily could go, where with what they've got into the next season, maybe add, an undrafted free agent or a late round wide receiver and still be fine. But if they added a guy in the kind of the mid rounds who has some upside, who maybe other teams are shying away from because they're not sure about the immediate consistency they can get from this guy, that's the kind of guy the Cowboys can target and really get a lot of use out of, because you can specifically use him the way you need to. You're not relying on him taking 80% of the snaps and having to learn the complete offense. You can just, kind of slice off a bit of his pie that he learns and that becomes useful for your offense as he develops into a larger wide receiver. That's why I really like the idea of drafting a wide receiver here, is because you're not in a situation like you were 2017 or whatever it was, where you're having to draft a guy to play right away because you don't have talent. You don't have, startable wide receivers at the top end of your depth chart. So I think the Cowboys are in a good spot to draft a wide receiver this year.
These two players aren't similar in the way they play, but the situations could be similar. Look at like what Tank Dell did for the Houston Texans last year. They didn't need him to be the number one receiver. They just needed him to provide some juice in the offense. I think somebody like Malachi Corley or even Xavier Worthy from Texas
Worthy
do similar things for the Cowboys. Let's talk more about the draft and how the talent in this draft might line up with the Cowboys' needs in round one. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We absolutely love FanDuel. You can get buckets right now with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. You can go bet on the futures markets, who's going to win MVP, who's going to win the Sixth Man of the Year. Go bet on who wins the NBA championship as well. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Landon, our next question comes from Kevin, a longtime listener of the show. He wants to know, how does the current media draft consensus board stack up with the Cowboys' needs? It seems like it's a great year to get high value at pick number 24.
Well, it works out great because I happen to know somebody that is keeps track of a very high-profile media consensus board, and he happens to be on this podcast.
Yeah, we got it.
So Marcus was kind enough to kind of share his board with us, and I was taking a look at it. I do think that, even before seeing this consensus board, to be honest, it feels like this draft lines up extremely well with what the Cowboys need, right? There's a lot of players at the top, a lot of elite talent at the top that are at positions that the Cowboys just aren't going to be drafting, right? The Cowboys aren't going to likely take a wide receiver in the first round.
No.
The Cowboys aren't likely to take a quarterback in the first round.
I would be shocked.
And if the Cowboys decided they wanted to take a tackle, there will be one available for them. But if they decide they don't want to take a tackle, there's going to be a lot of tackles that are going to be taken above them. So I do think that if you look at the board, especially compared to where we were last year, this lines up so much better for the Cowboys than it did last year. I do think that, you look at when I'm sure we're all running through our mock drafts and going through all these, and it just feels like there's a lot of available options for a lot of the positions that you want in the spots that you're looking to take them, right? Like there's just you get to 27 and there's tackles galore, or there's a corner that fell, or sometimes things get stupid and Brock Bowers falls, or I mean it's just such a case where there is a high number of I'm basing this on consensus board and just what you're hearing from people like Dane and other folks. There's a high number of first round grades in this year's class. The Cowboys are obviously picking late again this year, but the fact that there's such a high number of first round picks means that there is going to be a valuable player that kind of falls to the Cowboys. And whether that means that like somebody from the top slips down to the Cowboys, like you mentioned with the CeeDee Lamb situation, or simply that a lot of very good, money 5 positions get taken above the Cowboys, and then the Cowboys suddenly have their pick of the litter of, I don't know, the best center or the best defensive tackle, or the best, I don't want to necessarily talk about linebackers or running backs, but these are all things that will push down these positions that the Cowboys have need at. And can actually help you draft them in an appropriate, value spot, maybe in the second round for like linebacker, running back, some of those spots.
So you mentioned a couple of the Cowboys' needs, not in any order: center, defensive tackle, and corner. And I know some people are arguing a little bit on corner. It probably depends on what they do with Stephon Gilmore. If they bring back Gilmore, it's not as pressing of a need. But let's lump those 3 positions together: corner, defensive tackle, and center. If you look at the rest of the draft, and if you look at quarterbacks, wide receivers, offensive tackles, tight ends, okay, just those 4 positions on the consensus board, they make up 16 of the top 22 players on the consensus board.
Wow. I mean, that's good news, man. That means that there's a lot of really good players that are going to be taken above you. That's going to push down a lot of players that you need right to where the Cowboys will be waiting with open arms.
And that's why I said this draft lines up so much better than it did last year for the Cowboys, where we knew that they were looking at defensive tackles. Mozzie was the best one available, and there really wasn't any other option. Like that was kind of the guy that if you wanted a defensive tackle, he had to be the one to fall to you. But man, like corners, if you want Terrion Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell or Kool-Aid McKinstry or Nate Higgins, I mean, there's a ton of corners in this draft, and it's very likely that multiple of those guys fall to you. Or if you want the best center in the class, very likely that you could draft him at number 24. Even offensive tackles, Landon, like I mentioned some of the offensive tackles.
Yeah.
Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, not inside that top 22. So even of all of those guys that I mentioned, he's still available. So is Jordan Morgan from Arizona. Even Troy Fontenot from Washington, he wasn't in the side of that top 22 either. It just feels like the quality of player that you're going to get at 24 this year compared to previous years is maybe like 8 spots better than usual. Like I think normally you would get that guy at pick 15. You might be able to get him at pick 24 this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Cowboys are picking like 3 spots earlier than they did last year, and the difference is going and it's not just that they're picking 3 spots; it's the difference just in 3 spots in what they're going to have because of the class, not because of where they're picking, is enormous. Right?
In the needs. If you needed I guess the Cowboys do need a linebacker. This is not a great class to need like a first round linebacker, right?
Yeah.
Or if you needed a safety, safety, or let's say even edge rusher. Like I think some of the edge rushers after the top 20 gets a little scary, but the Cowboys don't necessarily need to draft an edge rusher high. So they're okay just passing on that position until later in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, again, all the spots that the Cowboys are going to be looking at, or are pretty much marked as need, are deep in this class, and line up again where you want. When you want to take a linebacker and running back in the 3rd or 4th, 5th round, you're going to have a lot of choices for those guys, especially running back in those rounds. When you're thinking about taking a corner or a wide receiver, maybe if someone pops in the 2nd round or something, there's going to be a ton of those guys, right, that are just going to show up. So even if you have to take one of those guys in the 1st round and you have to end up taking a center in the 2nd round, you're good to go there. it lines up in such a way that it feels like there are multiple ways to skin this cat, right?
Yes.
Like you can there's definitely different paths you can take and still be successful. I think, we talk a lot about, draft sequencing and about like making sure that your picks line up with the value and getting them in an order and such that you can still make sure to hit the positions that you need later in the draft with the appropriate value. There are multiple ways to arrange this for it to work in the Cowboys' favor. It just really does kind of line up in a way that that it really hasn't in quite a few years, it feels like.
Do you know how I know that this is going to be a good year for the Cowboys? Is anytime I go onto the Pro Football Focus mock draft simulator, I always love the options I have, like in round 2.
Yeah.
In other years, it's like, oh man, you're kind of grinding.
That tab open for 35 minutes, and it's like, who cares who I pick? But I'm still fighting it in my head, right?
You're kind of grinding your teeth a little bit just to get to the third round where you might like the options better. I get to the second round, and it's like, oh man, Malachi Corley's still there. Xavier Worthy's still there. Oh, our center from West Virginia, Zach Frazier, still there. Cooper Beebe, who I like from Kansas State. Like, there's just so many good options at every phase in this draft. It really makes me wish the Cowboys had more picks, but that's a discussion for a different day. Layden, let's talk about which player could potentially be the odd man out in Mike Zimmer's defense. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Everydayers, on tomorrow's show, we've got Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings to talk about Mike Zimmer and how he's going to fare as the Cowboys defensive coordinator. I know we've talked a lot over the last couple of days. He's very excited to see it, as am I. So make sure you guys tune in for that. And speaking of Mike Zimmer, Landon, our last question comes from John. He wants to know which player could be potentially the odd man out in Mike Zimmer's defense.
I mean, are we ruling J-Ron Curse out of
Yes.
Yeah, because it's like picking the most valuable player and then ruling the quarterback out. It's like
him and
Curse
Sharif Floyd are gone. I'd say that.
Yeah, Curse is like pretty much signed his walking papers at this point. It's an interesting question. I do think that there are some folks that are going to be moved around a little bit, obviously, because it's just the way this defense is played differently. I think that the first name that people would just kind of reflexively say would be Marquise Bell, but I don't know that that's the case. I think that Marquise Bell has a strong role as a safety on this team. So I would definitely not necessarily put him in that category. I got one. Give me one, because there's a couple like down roster guys that I think might have some issues, but
I wonder how Sam Williams is going to fit in this defense. Not from a scheme wise. I almost wonder more
discipline wise. Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, Zimmer is so hard on fundamentals, not making mistakes and staying in your lanes. And not that Sam Williams has always struggled with that, but I think Sam Williams led this team in penalties this season.
Yeah,
and a lot of them were on special teams and stuff. But I just wonder how he's going to fit as like a base 4-3 end in an over defense and what that looks like. I'm not saying it's not going to work, but I guess I just won't be surprised if like Chauncey Golston ends up becoming more of a base end than what Sam Williams does.
Yeah. See, I mean, to me, I view Sam Williams as a good fit for the Zimmer defense, just because I do think that he is he plays like a bendy edge guy, but he's a bigger guy. Like he's 265 and I think he could get up if he wanted to as well. So but I definitely 100% agree with the discipline aspect of that for sure. To me, it's funny you mentioned that, because to me, I wonder if the guy I wonder about specifically is Fahoku, right?
I was just about Junior Fahoku. Yeah.
Well, it's just because it's kind of like a lot of yo-yoing for him right now. So does he kind of go back to playing a defensive end position? And I guess I wouldn't so much put him as odd man out as he is going to have to kind of like maybe reverse his thinking a little bit more, and maybe he goes back to playing a defensive end position, right? Maybe he kind of plays a base defensive end spot, because I don't know that he's going to be, and maybe with some maybe kicking in, for some nickel stuff, but I just think that some of these guys that are the tweener inside outside guys, they're going to be spending a lot more time on the outside, I imagine, because you're going to be seeing more base defense. You're going to want to see some more stoutness on that other defensive end. So obviously I think it starts with Lawrence on that other side, and Lawrence is a fantastic fit for what Zimmer wants to do. But I think that, some of these guys that Quinn has brought in here as kind of inside outside guys, they'll be interesting. I think, look, I know that I think Overshone is going to need to put on some weight, because I do think that Overshone to me is the guy that I look at, and he is a Quinn pick. He looks like a Quinn linebacker. He doesn't necessarily look like a Zimmer linebacker. Obviously, the Cowboys are heavily invested in making Overshone work, and I think they clearly really like the player. But I think in order for him to kind of fit with what the Cowboys are going to be doing, he doesn't have the Bell option, right? He doesn't have the option of going to safety or playing another spot. Like, he is a linebacker. The question becomes, like, can he get to the kind of physical size that the Vikings, that the Zimmer linebacker kind of template would imply that they want. He has a whole offseason. He's trying to get back from his ACL, but that is an interesting fit. I think that isn't so obvious, especially when you consider that all the other linebackers on this team look like that as well.
Yeah.
So all the linebackers are going to need to be sitting in front of the executive chef that I mentioned earlier with Mozzie, and making sure that they're getting a lot of protein in between their weightlifting sessions.
I just want to mention a couple of the Dan Quinn defensive backs: Izzy Mukamu, Nashawn Wright, and Eric Scott. Like, these are all guys that are a little bit similar. They're long, athletic players. How do they play in a heavy cover 2 defense? Do they play corner? Where does Izzy Mukamu play? Is he playing safety? Is he playing the Harrison Smith role? Is he playing in the slot? I don't know. But those 3 guys, and I know Wright was a 3rd-round pick and the other guys were day 3 picks, but where do they fit in, if at all?
Am I crazy to think that Nashawn Wright might be a better fit in this defense?
Because I think he's a better fit, but I'm not so sure about Mukamu.
Well, Mukamu, I think you just play at safety, right? Like, and
Probably
figure something out at safety.
But how far down the depth chart is he at safety?
Well, Curse is gone, and now Bell's. So I think it's a matter of Bell and
what about Wanye?
What's that?
What about Wanye Thomas though?
Yeah, I mean, they got a lot of safeties. That's something that they're going to have to figure out. Is that how are they going to play all these safeties? They have a lot of talent here. Do they move off of one of these guys? Do they try to move Izzy to corner full time? And look, maybe you can afford to do some of that stuff when you're playing more kind of, there's going to be an uptick in cover 2. There's going to be more zone coverage. And even the man coverage that you're going to be playing is it's not like you're man all everywhere he goes. It's not Meg, right? It's a lot of match coverage, meaning it's man up the field, and then if you got a guy crossing in, that's when you kind of leave him to a zone, and that's really where guys like Wright and Mukamu and some of these safety corners, the bigger corner guys, would normally have issues, right? Chasing guys, as they run across the field. So I tend to think that some of these bigger guys actually might have more help schematically in this defense than they even did in a Quinn defense. But we'll see. I mean, there's just a lot of pieces that are good pieces that you kind of have to figure out how it all fits. And there may be a numbers game that includes, a trade at the end of this, because you might have 5 to 6 viable safeties when you're suddenly not playing nearly as much 3 safety looks as you were previously.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how Mike Zimmer views the current talent on this defense and how they best put those players to use. It's something I'm sure we'll hear about all offseason. Can't wait to find out more. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow with Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings.